Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me for this week's Object Talk Live. My name is Emma, and I am an engagement officer at the Jewish Museum, London. You are joining me this week for an object talk on an image of a Jewish peddler, a travelling salesman for our weekly theme of journeys. This object is one of over 40,000 objects in the Jewish Museum London's designated collection that shows the diversity of Jewish life and culture. Our programmes preserve the unique and diverse voices of Jewish communities and explore connections between faiths and cultures. I am now going to share my screen so you can have a look at the object I have chosen for today's talk. This object is a wooden fire guard. It has been painted to resemble a Jewish peddler with an open box of trinkets. It is currently on display near the beginning of our history gallery, and it is a very imposing figure. It stands at 116 centimetres tall, which is about 3 foot 8 inches, and it is 40 centimetres wide. I'm now going to show an image of this object with the colours lightened so we can make out the details slightly more clearly. This fireguard dates to around 1830. As a fireguard, its purpose would be to protect the people in a room with an open fire from the intense heat of the fire that was warming and lighting their home. It would also prevent any embers from spitting out of the fire and into the home. However, as we can clearly see, this is not just a practical fireguard. It has been designed in the shape of a Jewish peddler, with lots of detail being given to the design. This is a decorative object as well as a functional one. When the fire in the home was not lit, this fireguard would still be there as a decorative object. The decision to have the figure of a peddler on it was therefore a very purposeful one. So what was a peddler? A peddler was a salesman from the lowest and poorest sections of society. People who could not afford to rent a shop or invest in the amount of stock that would be required to fill even a very small shop. The most common type of peddler was the old clothes man, who was known as Old Clo. Before cheap, ready-to-wear garments became available through the invention of the sewing machine and also, of course, sweated labour, the poorer classes of society bought all their clothes second-hand. Whilst this type of peddler, the old clothes man, was the most common type of peddler, they were by no means the only type of peddler. We can see that the peddler on this fireguard is not selling old clothes. Some other peddlers would sell a mix and match of different items from their packs. These could include threads, buttons, scissors, shoe buckles, all sorts of things that people would need to mend and alter any second-hand clothes they bought. There were also jewellery peddlers. Jewellery was a good item for peddlers as it was small and lightweight but had value. Let's have a closer look at this particular peddler and his pack. We can see that jewellery features here very strongly. There are lots of gold chains that we can see and some coloured stones. So where would a peddler get the goods that they sold? Whilst they might not be able to purchase enough stock to be able to fill a shop, they would be able to buy fewer items which they could put in their packs and sell. They would buy these wholesale, and then with the money that they got from these, they would go on to purchase more items to sell, and so on. Around the country, swag shops popped up. These were shops where wholesale items could be purchased by peddlers who would then take them off in their packs to sell. One example of a man who founded a swag shop was Alexander Falmouth. He and his wife were the first Jewish people to settle in Falmouth. Now, as you might have guessed, Falmouth was not his surname at birth. That would have been quite a remarkable coincidence. Instead, he changed his name to Alexander Falmouth from Henry Moses. He was a silversmith by trade, and in the early 1770s, he set up a jewellery business, for which he hired peddlers to sell his goods. Falmouth would get the peddlers to gather at his house on a Friday for Shabbat. This would have been very convenient for him, as it ensured that in an area where the Jewish community was still very small, he always had enough men for a minyan, the Saturday morning prayers. It also allowed the peddlers, the travelling salesmen, to join a community for worship. The lifestyle of a peddler travelling long distances to sell goods might not otherwise lend itself to being able to celebrate Shabbat within a community. After Shabbat, Falmouth would give the men their goods each week to take out and sell. In this way, the location of swag shops led to small Jewish communities forming in remote parts of the UK, each centred around a swag shop. The hope that many peddlers would have had was to be able to save enough money to buy their own small shop, and then they in turn would pay other peddlers to pick up wholesale items to go and sell on, and so this pattern would repeat. Peddlers walked enormous distances on foot and alone, with roads being treacherous both in their maintenance and with the people that you were likely to meet on your travels. Rarely did peddlers receive a warm welcome wherever they went. Shop owners and landlords did not look kindly on them, and often they slept outside or in barns. Predominantly, peddlers were male, but it wasn't a solely male occupation. There are records of several female peddlers who seem to have shown no fear at this idea of travelling alone. There are also several records of North African Jews working as peddlers. These were more often found in urban areas and were known for selling spices and rhubarb. There were 6 registered in London by 1900. So why did so many Jewish people become peddlers? This fire guide dates to 1830, a time when the Jewish population of this country was relatively small. Jewish people had been readmitted to Britain in 1656. It had been illegal to be Jewish in this country before that, right back to 1290, when the Jewish community here had been expelled and sent out in boats from the port of London. Initially, after 1656, migration back to this country was very low. By 1700, there were only around 500 Jewish people in the country, and this only gradually increased throughout the 18th century. The majority of those who came here fell into the poorest classes in Britain, those who were more likely to need to take up peddling. Whilst Jewish people could informally settle in England again after 1656, the expulsion was not officially overruled, and Jewish emancipation did not take place until the mid-19th century. There were therefore many restrictions on Jewish people, and they were barred from many trades. There was also a language barrier that many Jewish people faced when they came to this country, and it made it hard for them to find other sources of employment. Naturally, they turned to peddling, although very often these Jewish people were very well educated in their first language and also in religious studies. The first Jewish people to come here were members of the Sephardi community. This community traced their ancestors back to places like Spain, Portugal, and North Africa, although many had previously been living in Amsterdam. They set up Bevismark Synagogue, and this synagogue supported immigrants with the purchasing of the required peddler's license that was needed to trade as a peddler. Ashkenazi migration followed. The Ashkenazi Jewish community traced their ancestors back to places like Russia and Eastern Europe. As greater numbers of poorer Ashkenazi Jews migrated to London, the Sephardi community became increasingly worried about them being seen to be begging in the streets. They were very concerned about the effect this would have on how the English viewed Jewish people, their position being so vulnerable due to the expulsion still technically being legal. In fact, successive city governments petitioned the king to reinforce the 1290 expulsion of the Jews, and so the community were very much subject to the whims of rulers. Due to this fear, the established Sephardic community were happy to continue to give newcomers a couple of guineas to start them off with a peddler's pack and a few cheap goods. This arrangement was done to ensure that as many immigrants as possible were not seen as a burden on Englishmen, and it led to the stereotype that there was no such thing as a Jewish beggar. Several high-profile writers of the 19th century remark upon this. In a select committee report on the Alien Immigration Act of 1888, the Samuel Hall was asked, "Can you speak within your knowledge of any instance of there, by which they mean Jewish immigrants, being in any way supported by the rates, either indoor or outdoor relief?" To which the committee answered, "No, I do not know of a single case." So let's look closely at this particular object again. Despite the support of the community to find a trade for Jewish peddlers and keep them from falling into poverty or reliance on charity, this object is not a kind representation of a Jewish peddler. As more immigrants arrived, the word peddler or hawker became almost synonymous with the word Jew, and caricatures became prominent. This peddler is shown with a rather elongated nose, a pointed chin, both anti-Semitic caricatures, stereotypes of Jewish people. To me, the peddler has also been painted with small, beady eyes, and there is something in the expression of this painted face that to me is made to look shifty and trustworthy. And I think there is something quite greedy about this painting, about the expression on the face, and about the positioning of the peddler's arms over the top of his pack filled with jewellery. It's not a comfortable image, and yet this is one of the more subtle examples of anti-Semitic images of peddlers. I'm now going to show you another image in our collection. This one dates to 1794 and shows another Jewish peddler. He has been given an absurdly long nose in this image, a very pointed chin, a long curly beard and curly unkempt hair, this curly hair being another stereotype given to Jewish people in anti-Semitic art. Over on the right-hand side, we have two men laughing at the peddler as he runs away. Relations with local shopkeepers and neighbours was often poor. Traditional shopkeepers saw the peddlers as competition and complained that Jewish peddlers worked longer hours than normal, thus undercutting them. They get great enjoyment over the fact that this peddler is being chased out of the town. The peddler is being chased by pigs. Pigs feature frequently in anti-Semitic images of this time. The idea of Jewish people not eating pork was something that their Christian neighbours found hard to process, and was used as a sign of their differentness, creating this sense of the other, and seemingly being a great source of anti-Semitic humour. In this image, the supposed irony of a Jewish person being chased by a pig with a pig even in the peddler's pack, gives the two people in the background this sort of great sense of merriment. And we have another example here of an image of a peddler. This image is called Too Many for a Jew. By its title alone, it is a very uncomfortable image. It shows a Jewish peddler having his goods stolen by a group of children. You might be able to make out that one of the children has just thrown up some of the items in his peddler's pack up in the air, which is where the three characters in the centre are all looking up to. Once more, we see that the peddler in the centre has been given a long nose, a pointed chin, curly hair, and he's been given very sort of raggedy clothes, all working together to create that anti-Semitic stereotype of the Jewish person as different, as the other. This image finds an uncomfortable level of humour in what was a dangerous and difficult lifestyle. Peddlers were easy victims of robbery. They travelled by themselves and were known to have their packs of goods on them. There are also several recordings of Jewish peddlers being murdered in their travels, often by those posing to help them with their English. The humour supposedly in this image of a peddler being outwitted and robbed by a group of children is unsettling to look at. So let's move back to the first object that we started with, the fire guard. This is not just an image of a peddler, but as we described at the start, it is a fire guard. Now, we do not know who the family were who first had it in their home. From the size of this fire guard and the great detail given to its design, we can assume that they were relatively wealthy. It makes me speculate on what this object would have looked like, juxtaposed against the furnishings of a middle or upper class 19th century home. The image of a poor Jewish peddler in a comparatively wealthy house. Was it a source of amusement at dinner parties? Did they show it off to their friends? How did they feel having this anti-Semitic image of a peddler in their home day in, day out, looking at them even when the fire was not lit? How did it make them feel? It is a thought that makes me highly uncomfortable, as indeed it is to look at anti-Semitic images from our collection. To come face to face with objects that depict Jewish people as the other, find amusement in their misfortune, and build upon and add to anti-Semitic stereotypes. It's unpleasant. But at the Jewish Museum, we believe it is important to address and challenge stereotypes, even though this can be uncomfortable. Our theme this week across the museum is journey, and this object depicts a journeying salesman. But it also makes me think of a different type of journey, a journey of time. Since 1830, there have thankfully been many changes, such as Jewish emancipation. But it would be wrong to think that anti-Semitic stereotypes are in the past. In recent years, anti-Semitism has risen, and stereotypes shown in this 200-year-old object are still found in contemporary art and news stories. The journey is not over yet, and through our museum's programmes, we are committed to engaging people with Jewish faith and culture, showing its diversity and challenging the long history of these stereotypes. Thank you so much for joining me for this week's Object Talk and for supporting our museum in this journey. Do join us again next week when my colleague Shireen will be doing a live object talk on the theme words. We will see you there.